Ladies and gentlemen, well, I mean, mostly ladies. I figure most of you are women, right? We are going to wrap this up by rendering our inserts, bringing them into Visual Pinball, and calling it a day. So I've got all of our inserts over here in the workshop. I blew them up a little bit. They're a little oversized for what they actually would be in the game, to make up for any positioning errors or even mapping errors as we go. And then you remember this insert text that we made way back? It's still not visible to the camera, but we're going to make sure that it's rendering on those inserts so that we get a little bit of shadow on the inserts as we go. So I'm going to render this out. Also a version without the insert lights on, so we can try to blow some Visual Pinball lights through the rendered version, the lit version, to give it a lit effect where we actually can see some of these bulbs through as they light up. So let's give that a shot, and we'll reconvene here in a few minutes. So here are our inserts with the GI on, but no lighting through them except this one, which is always on. That's part of the GI. And you can see just a little bit of shadow from our text, but those look really nice. You have some reflection, and the reflection varies depending on the material of the inserts, because some of these are very glossy and some of these are that more diffused, rougher texture. So, kind of a high level of realism there, which is a neat thing to have. And then what I also did is rendered from the exact same perspective, like that, the text for the inserts. And in a perfect world, you would take your playfield texture and you would take that text layer and you would have those there. And then right underneath the playfield, you would have your mesh with the inserts. But because the playfield is forced to be static, it creates a black halo around all of the text, and it looks terrible. I only know this because I built an entire project to work this way, because logically it makes sense that you would do it this way. Only to find out in the 11th hour that it couldn't be done, and it was infuriating. So I hope this can spare you a little bit of time. So can't do it that way. So there are two other options. One would be to create another mesh and lay it over the playfield with this texture, which is a huge texture for such a little bit of text. And so that is not a great use of resources. If we can do it another way, we want to. If we have to, it'll be okay. So my idea, and this has to be tested, is to just overlay that rendered text layer directly on the inserts, or we could have rendered it this way if we knew this was going to work. But I didn't know, so I wanted to have the option. So now we've overlaid the text right onto our off texture for the inserts, but not on the lit version, because these are slightly below. These are going to sit slightly below the unlit version, and then have light blown through them, so that you see them through this. But there's just a tiny bit of parallax where they're a little lower than this, and so you'd see kind of a weird fringing around the edges because it's lower depending on your perspective. You'd have to be directly overhead for that not to be an issue. All right, so I've already brought all that into Visual Pinball. I didn't want to start talking this through until I tested it first. And so what I have is a couple layers to do the inserts. The first is, and I'll go through this in the order that I have them stacked. So the first is a mesh of the unlit inserts. So that's a mesh that is basically a flat plane, but UV projected from this perspective. And it covers the playfield, and it has the image of the unlit inserts on it. It's sitting just below the playfield. You can see on Z, just below it. And disable lighting is at 1, so any lights underneath aren't going to affect that texture. It has a material that has an opacity of like 95%. And what that allows us to do is show through the lit inserts, which are sitting directly underneath. So if that was at 0.5Z, this is at -1Z. So it's just directly underneath. We have an exact copy of that mesh with the lit inserts underneath it. And then a material that's going to let light affect it. So that our disable light from below on this is 0. So then what we do is have an insert that is, instead of having an image like you would if you were lighting it directly off the playfield, we're using an actual bulb with a halo height of -4, so it's actually sitting below the lit playfield mesh. So stacked, you have playfield, unlit inserts, lit inserts, and light. And so we're really trying to make this as realistic as possible. We want transmit to be high. We want to see the reflection on the balls, which is a neat effect. And so let's just take a look here. There are such easier ways to do this, but I'll show you the benefit that I think is worth it. Is up here, you can see the reflection from the metal on the inserts, and the inserts have an actual, their own material with the reflection. And so I think that's really cool. The other benefit is that you really get the sense of a light glowing underneath here. You can see the bulb a little bit on the really translucent ones, which, is accurate if you look at a real game. But it really looks like it lights up underneath there, and it's hard to get that same look just using a playfield image and a light. So, you can see that looks pretty good. So we have what, really is a pretty complete game here. I'm going to mess with the materials on the flippers, and, if I have to, I can, bake out some ambient occlusion or something for these, because they don't look very realistic. They are the only thing right now that Visual Pinball is actually using like a native material on with no texture. So, those right now visually are kind of the weak link. And what else am I missing? Oh, I guess I'll probably render out a shadow, just like we did for the drop targets, for our ball guide right here. But otherwise, we're looking at a pretty complete game. So I just need to go through now and assign all of the inserts numbers. And so we've got our manual here, and this will just take 15 or 20 minutes to get all those in place. And then I'll be back with a few final thoughts, and we'll be done. So to wrap up, let's just talk about GI lighting real quick, and then we're going to call this project done. It's playing nice. I need to tweak sounds a little bit and clean up the script. But I think our visuals are done, and we're essentially done bringing things in from Blender, which was the point of this whole thing. So I have this bulb mesh right here, and so I'm just bringing it in and using it in Visual Pinball instead of using the built-in bulb mesh that's part of VP lighting. Now these are just flat 2D discs of light, and a lot of times you have to stack them in order to get good looking light, or you have to shape them around objects because it doesn't break around, it doesn't give you the what is it, a penumbra. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a disk of light, and we're going to bury it. It's at -8 underneath the playfield. It's pretty bright, and it has incandescent color to it. It transmits at 1, and it shows up on balls. The only reason that I'm using this, well, there's two reasons I'm using this. One is to light up this bulb mesh that we're adding, okay, because that doesn't have disable light from below disabled. So the light's going to come up from underneath this, and it's going to kind of make this glow. So that's important. The other thing that this GI light is doing is it's reflecting off the ball. So it's good to have these in, although nothing about this actual light here is visible on the playfield. It's buried beneath the playfield. And I've added a bunch of those, only in places where it makes sense that the either a bulb needs to be lit up, and that I only place those in places where you might see a bulb, like here or here when you're in desktop view. And I even put in a couple extras in case guys doing VR might see these. But most places, here and here and here, didn't put in a bulb. It's not worth the polys. So in addition to dropping a bulb there, I also put lights in anywhere there's a bulb, or anywhere that it makes sense that light would be reaching the ball during gameplay. So up here, behind this metal wall, I don't have any VP lights in here because it doesn't make sense. None of that light is going to get to the ball whatsoever, and all the light that we need is already baked into our textures. And so, why waste resources? I put lights in here by the bumpers because you're going to get some light off the bumpers. So that's it. This bulb has a texture and some transparency on it so that it glows really nice with this light underneath it, but it doesn't have all that crazy amount of bloom that some people use to try to disguise the fact that there are just 2D lights trying to make it look like light's coming from somewhere. So we lose that kind of awful bloom effect. I'll show you real quick. So here you can see all of our insert lights working properly, and you can also see, let's get a ball out here. You can also see how those visible bulbs glow and even give us some light off the ball. Boy, I have those bumpers too hot, don't I? Holy cow. But say down here, for example, let's catch the ball. You can see that, that lamp is illuminating the ball, although, not a bunch of bloom, or it's not super strong. We don't want it to be distracting, but we want it to be realistic. So, I think that that's a good looking way to do a bulb. It'll fade on and off with that VP light, which is cool. It's not just binary, like on and off. I think we've also solved with screen space that question that I talked about earlier about what to do with the metal in these lights. You can see that these light up, actually. Let's get that center one lit. There. So you can see that's actually lighting up. It's subtle, and I could crank up the lights underneath these that are making this happen and try to exaggerate that a little bit. But that actually works really well without having to resort to adding flashers or cheating any other kind of light. So I used to really hate screen space, and now I think in really small doses it does some useful things. So anyway, let's call this project done. So in conclusion, I guess, we took the long way doing this project just to sort of make everything visible, modeling things, textures and materials, rendering things out from camera view, all the physics, bringing them into Visual Pinball and getting everything looking good in there. Projects don't have to take this long, and they don't need to be done in this kind of detail to be good. This was just kind of an illustration of what can be done, and hopefully it gave you some ideas for your next project. I'll show you one really cool benefit is that we did this in like 40 episodes, and probably took at least half of those episodes before we got to a point that looked like this for Seawitch. But because I built all of those things out and I have confidence in the scale and texturing and materials of all of those, I opened this up the other day during work meeting and just started tinkering around, and in 2 hours, that's all it took. In 2 hours, I had everything except for just a little bit of texturing and the plastics done for Meteor. So, I mean, now I've got this kit that works for, classic Sterns, and most of these pieces are used on other games from that era, the Bally's especially. So I've got this kit now that can build games really quickly. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the detail that went into this, know that you can, model these things in Blender, and don't worry about the rendering or texturing in Blender. Just bring your models over to Visual Pinball and give them a material and go. I mean, it's still easier than actually building in Visual Pinball's 2D editor, and hopefully just this helped kind of show the possibilities of what you can do. So thanks for joining me. Thanks to the guys who helped get a really nice Seawitch scan for this project. Wouldn't have been able to happen without you. And thanks for everyone that's just kind of been along for the ride and tossing in ideas. I know I learned a lot trying to do this and talk out loud. And it's just been, fun to kind of talk through the whole thing with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see you later.